I know they've done studies on people working from home, and there's a guilt associated with it. So you'll find yourself working till 1 or 2 in the morning because you don't think you're doing enough work, because you're not seeing other people working, and other people aren't seeing you working. So you think you're not doing enough. Yeah, my wife suffers from that a great deal. I'm a little bit more laid back and lazy.
So we have about 30 seconds before we start. I just want to say hello to everyone that's jumped on the call. We were all just having a quick chit chat. This is one of those webinars where we are pretty talkative, and we like to do as much interaction as possible. So say hello inside the chat room. Send us your favorite emoji in the chat room. There's a thing to do. Everyone has a favorite emoji. And just let us know you're alive. Let us know that you're good. We were asking people how are things inside their country right now. Just found out that Lebanon had their first day of 0 cases. Seeing some nice flexing happening over here in terms of favorite emojis. That's one of my favorite questions to ask people. Okay, so we are on time. I said I was going to start at 4 o'clock on the dot, so here we are, 4 o'clock on the dot. Let's go. So I want to welcome everyone to the Quality Leaders Network. In this session, we plan to be talking about how to achieve a culture of quality when you're working remotely. The original webinar was all about how to achieve a culture of quality. And then people said, hey, can we add on just a little bit of ideas of how to work in this remote environment? And I am going to be your host, and we have 2 special guests that I'm going to talk to you about just in a second, because I want to give you some context about, how we ended here and what we're actually doing. So I am the co-founder of a company called Global App Testing, and also the author of a book that's an Amazon bestseller called Leading Quality. And I'm just so pumped that we get to have this time together to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is how do we look at culture of quality inside our companies. But before we begin, I want to give you a bit of context as to how did we even end up here having this conversation. So I think it was February 2016. I was in my office, and I was just got off a call with a customer. And the call was generally quite good. They were telling us, that they love the work that we're doing for them, and things are going incredibly well. But as I got off the call, something kind of troubled me. And the problem that I noticed was that they were facing some internal blockers as to why they weren't able to fix certain issues or why they weren't being able to improve their quality. And they weren't related to us as a company. And I knew in my head that if we could help them think through, how they solve those problems internally, they'd get even more use out of working with us. So I kind of put that to the side of my head, but it wasn't until we started doing some work with a customer to test their application in Indonesia that everything really kind of kicked into gear for me. So we were doing this test, and after the test had happened, a test had reported a bug that said, I can't sign up for this app because the first name and last name are both compulsory. And this didn't make sense to most of us. We're like, what are you talking about? But it turns out that in Indonesia, about 40% of the population don't have a surname. And so in actual fact, if you remove that surname from being compulsory, they saw this crazy level of signups happen. And the moment that happened, their whole management team, who at that point didn't care that much about what could quality do, they stood up, paid attention, and they started to invest way more in quality initiatives. They started to think about it as a more holistic thing. And as we kind of started to do that, more and more, we said to ourselves, could we find out the best way to look at leading quality inside your company? So we went off and we met all the top people of all of the heads of engineering, VPs of quality, etc., across the world, and understood what is it that made them really good at quality and what helped them really progress quality inside their companies. And we ended up writing this book that we released last year called Leading Quality that became an Amazon bestseller. And the coolest thing about, having a book that's a bestseller is that you get this great opportunity to meet some incredible people. And we've got 2 of those on this call today. And as we talked through the ideas of this book with lots of different people, this concept emerged of what we call an impact triangle. And the impact triangle is about how does the work that we do as leaders impact different parts of our org, and where should we be focusing? So the first type of impact is what I call customer impact. And customer impact is about how do you develop your product so that it's incredible for your customers? How do you make sure that they get a product that really excites them, and make sure that it's not too buggy in and of itself? The second area of impact is team impact, and this is looking at how can we have the resources to how can we resource our team correctly, and how can we make sure that we're working on the highest impact things as a team as we move forward. And then the final type of impact is this idea of company impact, and it's how do you support the company as a whole, like as a big picture item. And this is more about creating that culture of quality inside the company and supporting the company in its growth. Now, what I kind of realized is that when I spoke to different people in the industry, many of them were very good at the conversations around customer impact or team impact, but not many people were talking about this whole wider context of a company impact. And I think as leaders, we actually have to be holistic in all three of these. And so today's session is going to be very much focused on deep diving into this idea of company impact. And what we're going to talk about is how can you achieve a culture of quality inside your company. Now, like I said at the start, this is something that I get super excited about. And my aim of this session is to give you my all. I want to get the most out of the speakers that we have here. And I want to make sure that we share some ideas that you can maybe have some takeaways that you can use this week or next week inside your own team. Because if you can apply the things that you learn in the session, then I know it's going to have more value to you. And I think the combination of that and some of the things that we've learned at Global App Testing as we've supported our own customers as they've been going through their transformations internally should provide some cool knowledge. So that's my commitment to you. What I want from you is for you just to stay focused and to stay engaged. And if you have questions as they're coming up, write them down, because at the end we're going to have a Q&A session and I want us to be able to answer as many of those questions as possible. And if you hear something and you're like, yeah, I already know that, I've thought about that, just take a moment and go, okay, but how can I apply this right now in the situation that I'm in? For most of us, our worlds have changed. We're now working from home, which has changed the context of how we deal with our relationships inside our company. So I'm going to do everything I can, and I hope that you enjoy what we got going on today. So here's the agenda. First part is we're going to talk about what's the quality narrative. And this is about what are the narratives and cultural ideas that are happening inside your company. Then we're going to say, who do you need to influence inside your company, and what different ways of looking at that influence? Then we're going to move on to how can you do some of that leading while working remotely. And then towards the end, we've got some very special bonuses that we have never actually ever done before. It's pretty exciting, pretty new for us to share this with people that we're going to be sharing at the end. And then we're going to have some time for questions and answers, so make sure you think about what questions that you might have. So I want to introduce you to our guests. We have two incredible guests that have got me super excited about today's webinar. So firstly, we have Mark Bland, who's the head of test at Premier Farnell, and then also Philip Curran, who's the head of quality at eShopWorld. And I don't want to do you guys a disservice by giving the rundown of your background. So I'd love, if you could start, Mark, by giving a 30-second rundown of, you, so people have a bit more context about what you've been up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I fell into testing like a lot of people do after a 10-year or so career in engineering, in electronic and electromechanical engineering. That industry was pretty much dying in the UK, so I found myself in lots of different jobs, which led me to working at Farnell, providing product support for their product range. And whilst doing that, I got to supporting websites and stuff. And then when the websites became an internally developed solution, they asked me if I wanted to come and join the testing team. I didn't even know it was a job, but I joined. And since then, I've spent the last 14 years working in the testing team, pretty much having every role in that team, from junior tester to automation tester to non-functional tester, managing each of those teams at a team leader and manager level. and finally worked my way to the top. And I've gone on that journey with Farnell as they've not only developed their own websites and implemented their own websites, but learned how to do development internally, because there's a big learning curve there. So
Awesome.
we've gone on a big journey together.
And I think, one of the things I'm most excited about Mark being on this call is he has some really interesting ways that he's looked at influencing the people inside his company to change the way they look at quality. So I'm looking forward to him sharing that later on today with us. Philip, just give us a quick 30 seconds on yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ron. Similar to Mark, kind of fell into it from more of an operations side. Maybe 20 years ago, maybe a bit less than that. So I feel like I've aged 10 years in the last week anyway. Was working in gaming solutions, which essentially was the lottery for different parts of the world. 6 years ago, joined eShop World in a small kind of warehouse with 12 or 13 developers. They'd never seen a QA before. So spent the last 6 years building up the quality function there to encompass functional automation and performance. And that's pretty much it.
Awesome. So I did get a message saying, hey, can we slow down a little bit? Ronald, you're too excited. I'll slow down. Don't worry about that. And then also a question here about, what do we mean by leading quality? And is it limited to testing or quality and overall SDLC? For me, it's very much about the whole of our org. When we talk about leading quality, we're actually talking about it across the entire company. There are certain areas that we may personally be able to affect, and those are the ones that we sometimes start with. But really, and we'll talk about this shortly, quality when you're leading quality, you actually have to look at it from how can we make the whole company be looking at quality. And so with that, and it segues perfectly into where I wanted us to start, is this whole idea of what is your quality narrative? And so inside the kind of, when we went and spoke to all these different people around looking at how they looked at quality, we discovered that having a good narrative around quality was pretty important. And the thing is, we all have a narrative inside our company, whether we like it or not. And that narrative may be a good one in terms of the way that people talk and think about quality inside our company, or it might be a bad one. But what we need to be cognizant of is the clearer we are of the narrative that we have inside our company, we know when and how we look to change it. And so there are 3 common narratives that we came across when we were looking into this. And the first one is this idea of an ownership narrative. Who's responsible for quality inside your company? If it's just the testing teams that are responsible, usually it's very hard to get change happening across the rest of the business. The second type of narrative that you might have is the how to test narrative. What is the right way we should be doing the testing? Sometimes people think we should use specific tools, or they might look elsewhere and say, hey, those guys are doing it in this way, so should we. And a lot of the time, it's very important to understand the full context of how other people are using those tools, because they might not work for you in your environment with your situation and your team's understanding and knowledge. And then the last narrative that we have is what we call the value narrative. And it's how do you start to produce more of an ROI, and how do you talk about the ROI of investing in quality? And so I wanted to bring this conversation straight to the team. And I think, Philip, you had some really interesting ways of talking and thinking about this idea of the ownership narrative and the journey that you've been on. So I'd love if you could share that with people.
Yeah, sure. So, ownership has played a huge part in eShop World in regards to testing. So, as I said, about 6 years ago, I joined. There was no tester. They'd never seen a tester. I'm not sure they knew what one was. So, in the preceding, in the following 3 years, we onboarded so many retailers that we had to build up a huge manual, a huge functional arm of testing. And what that did was that embedded in the mindset of the company that quality, or probably to be more specific, testing was very much in the remit of the QA team. So about 3 years ago, about maybe 2-3 years ago, time is irrelevant at the moment. We decided to move to re-platform and move to continuous deployment. So I had to kind of come up with a test strategy to move us towards that. And that personally for me, that's when I moved from thinking about quality as a testing and moving towards quality as a mindset. So we really had to move, right? How do we rebrand quality almost in the team, in the company? No longer does it sit with the QA, and now it needs to come from the top. The CEO needs to understand what performance means and what performance means to his product, mainly what performance means to his paycheck, and just to get to get that buy-in, so what we've kind of tried to embed, and I wouldn't like to say we're very successful, but we've successful, depending on the people, is a group ownership of quality and an individual responsibility to satisfy that. So, so it's just, it's very much kind of, that's where we're at the moment.
And so it's always interesting when you meet people and they explain that they've gone through this transition. You started off at this point where, QA responsible for quality. It was like a necessary evil. I remember you telling me in people's minds. And now you're at this point where it's been shifted, and it's more of a group ownership view of quality. And so what I would love to understand, and I think most of the people listening, is how did you go about changing that? What were some of the things you did to help make that influence?
Yeah. So what I, the first, so initially when my boss, the CTO, came to me and asked me to do this, I'll be honest, it took me a month or so to get my head around it, because all I could feel in the back of my head was, this is the death of QA. We're going to continuous deployment. We're going to lose the team. But what we kind of found was the team have obviously been integral in this. So in the first couple of months, I made a mistake, and I was over prescriptive. What I did was I came up with a lot of processes. I came up with a lot of processes in how developers should act around quality, so around testing, LPOs. And what I kind of found, I got bad feedback from it. They just weren't taking it on board, because what I'd done there was I still made it mine. I'd still made the process QA. So instead of that, and it was the head of development, I had a great chat with her, and what we kind of came up with was, instead of setting processes, set goals. So the goals were that everyone had to sign off on the test scenarios that had been articulated for this feature, and then it was the individual's responsibility to satisfy that. We had other simple things around kind of, I mentioned earlier on about rebranding the team. So we changed. We weren't the QA team anymore. We were the quality team. The role within the team changed. They were more coaches on quality. That was a tough sell. That was, I thought my biggest roadblock would be developers and POs. My actual biggest roadblock were QA, because they didn't want to relinquish control of quality to the developers, because they didn't trust them. And I'm hoping no one from the company is online here, but I agreed with them. So what we had to do was we had to attack it from both sides. So the mindset of, great, everyone has to think about quality. These are the goals you have to set, but you have to underpin that with kind of with metrics, and not process, but metrics and guidelines, and the ability to kind of easily spot where things are going wrong. That's kind of how we did it.
I think that's super interesting, because what you've got there is, at the start you were like, this is my thing. You've made it your own. You're like, this is what we should be doing, and then it's almost like there was this level of pushback. And it's funny, because everyone thinks that they're a genius, right? So when you try and push an idea in front of someone and it wasn't their idea, you didn't let it foster with them, sometimes it's hard to get that adoption. And instead you started to look at, what are the goals that we actually want to get to, and how can we make that a shared goal rather than you prescribing that process. And I made another note here of a thing you just said, which is you rebranded the team. And I've actually seen this happen quite a lot when I've seen people go in to really change the way that people think, because sometimes there are connotations with ways of certain terms. And by changing those terms, people start to look at things differently. And I've seen everything from people change it to just a quality team to a product quality team, rather than so that they're really focused on that product side. And it's super interesting seeing that kind of shift. Do you have any thoughts to add, Mark? Or Philip,
Yeah, so one of the things I found interesting that you picked up on there, Philip, was talking about, you know, making people giving people ownership of what they're doing, and being able to sort of set them goals. Did you find you also had to adopt or foster a culture of no blame and not picking people up for making mistakes, acceptable mistakes, basically, you know, as learning objectives and not failures?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was what we came up with was that. So just to go back to something that Ron said there, we rebranded test cases to test scenarios. So everyone had to, the whole team during refinement had to articulate and agree on the test scenarios. So when they were satisfying those test scenarios, there was no blame, there was no stupid questions, there was no stupid test or anything like that. But where we did, and we were a little bit stricter on, was ignorance was not an excuse for not satisfying the test. Like, if you agreed to the test, you should know what the test is meant to do. You know, that was,
if you don't have the information, take the initiative to find that information.
Exactly.
It's I think I find they're the harder things to change, the behaviours around how people test, because there's a lot of hand grenade throwing in old school testing and development, where you just basically sit on either side of the fence and lob bombs at each other. And so getting to that point where you actually make each individual responsible for going and talking to their development or test counterpart, and, you know, sorting it out for themselves. And it has, I've had similar issues myself where has literally been a case of, what's the problem? And I've highlighted the problem, saying this person's doing this and this person's that. It's right. Go and talk to them and fix it between you. Just go and have a conversation and actually work through it, because you're both aiming at the same goal here. So you shouldn't be fighting each other to get there. Just go and talk to each other, sit down and do it together, work through this together. And, you know, you start to foster that culture where everybody's in it together and everybody owns what's being delivered, but also everybody gets the reward for what's being delivered and gets that feeling of success when it's right.
So what we'd also found was that we'd gone from a place where the PO was responsible for the user story, and then QA responsible for letting it into the sprint or rejecting it. And what we had to foster was, okay, great, QA are still responsible for making sure the user stories meet standards. But what we found was they'd just walk away from it. I was like, what are you doing walking away from it? Yeah. You can fix that user story. You know, anyone can write a user story, you know, once everyone's agreed to it. So it is just that kind of, we're all in this together. We're all responsible for the same thing.
If you ignore a problem, you're complicit.
Yes. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. 100%.
There's a question that came in here from Michael, which is kind of saying, you know, when you have this whole idea of changing people's mindsets and the need to change that QA mindset is important. But when you have certain senior QA people who, you know, may have been in their role for longer than others, who have certain ways of looking at the world, I'm adding some ad lib here, Michael, that it might be harder for them to make that transformation. And then he was asking what are some interesting insights or resources for that. And so to answer that question, I actually want us to move on to the next point, because it pretty much is just looking at the same thing, which is this whole idea of influence. And I think as leaders, we are always influencing people in different directions. Sometimes we have to influence our bosses, our peers, and a lot of the time our team. And I always find that the idea of influencing and persuading isn't always welcomed that much by people from a technical background, because it's the kind of sometimes the dirty thing that the sales people often do. And there's this wonderful quote from Daniel Pigg in his book called To Sell Is Human. It says, people in non-sales roles spend nearly 40% of their time influencing, persuading, and convincing others. And I always make the analogy, if you have a partner in your life, children, or like work colleagues, you have to persuade. And so rather than it being something that is say dirty, it's actually a skill that we all need to improve if we're going to be better at it. And so I have some thoughts and some resources, but I would love to just hear from you, Mark, because one of the things I really like about your story is how you've looked at having to influence people along the way. Because when you first started, there was a certain view and you had to make a change. And I remember you telling me a story about a situation that you had with a very senior developer in your team.
Yeah. So when we first took over developing our websites, we really were pretty naive. We had a support team, and that's pretty much all we had. So a series of support devs that suddenly became the development team for the whole website. And obviously along that journey, you realize you're not going to deliver all this stuff with just those people. So we started bringing in consultants and contractors and various people. But at this time, we were just starting all of our QA practices, and I've got to admit we were pretty archaic in the way we were approaching it. We're quite waterfall and quite a laborious process. The scripts were heavy and went into many different scenarios. And there was a piece of work we were working on that basically just wasn't going anywhere. It was just going backwards and forwards between dev and test, and it would get into a real blame sort of he said, she said, and we just weren't getting anywhere. So I got hold of the consultant who was leading the team and who was leading the dev for this team. I didn't actually get hold of him, so there was no violence. Let me just clarify. But I got together with him and I asked him if he'd fancied spending a day of just sitting side by side and going through like developing this feature. He makes a change and I test it and I show him what I'm seeing. So it's not just getting the message that it's failed. It's actually seeing my test process and I'm seeing his development process, so we can start to appreciate where both of us are coming from. And I think it were an eye-opening experience for both of us, I think, when we did that. And a lot of people do this now, this paired developer and tester scenario, and I think it's a common thing these days. But back then we were just learning, really. And one of the things that really stood out was he gained a much better appreciation for the approach to testing and how different it is from an engineer's mindset of delivering something. And I got a real understanding for the complexity of the application we were working with and how he was restricted in the way that he could deliver it. And with that common understanding started to create a much better working relationship, not just between me and this developer, but between the development team and the testing teams, because that message disseminated down through the teams, through conversation, through seeing the success of that small piece of work. And that whole thing probably lasted about a month. It was just one cycle in a test series, but it changed completely the way we looked at working with one another. Fast forward much further down the line, I think the whole process these days is very much different now in the way that we interact with developers and with testers, and everybody takes that responsibility. I think I may have drifted slightly off topic here, Ron. Do you want to bring me back online?
That's absolutely perfect, because one of the things that it's interesting, the more people that you speak to that have very almost like private or unique situations, the more you realize how common they actually are. And when we were sitting asking these questions, when we were doing the work for the book and speaking to our customers, they too said very similar things. They talked about the need to really build empathy and what are the different ways that you could build empathy. And really that whole idea of pair programming is an empathy like fast track. When you actually sit in someone else's shoes and understand what they're doing, it is incredible how your perspective starts to change now that you have that new information. And that's pretty much what you're talking about there. And even though you didn't talk about it just now, one of the things that I learned when we were having our pre-conversations was that because you had gone through all of these different roles inside the business, where you'd almost understood what someone was really doing across the board, it actually allowed you to be better at influencing people because of that empathy that you had for them.
Yeah, so when I joined Farnell, I'd been a customer of Farnell for 10 years as an engineer, as an electronic engineer. And I should point out, Farnell is not a software company. Farnell distribute electronic components. So selling anything software related or test team and infrastructure related is really difficult because it's not our primary business, or at least it wasn't. Now we sell 80% of our stuff through the website, so they're very important. But, having that understanding of the industry meant that I understood the product range, and then working in the tech support teams meant that I understood the challenges that the people buying the products and the buyers and the marketeers had on their side of the job. And it meant that I understood the sales team's challenges in terms of the calls they were getting from customers. And I think it just paints a really good picture for you of the challenge that everybody's facing. You know, I think this is for me a really useful thing to do in any team, especially if you bring in new people into a team, is have a really solid induction process where you make everybody spend time with everybody in that chain of delivery. You need to understand the impact your role has on other people, be it positive or negative, and the impact that their roles could have on yours and the restrictions that they could have on your role. You know, if I don't think you can genuinely assess requirements for a company application without understanding your customers and your internal teams, your internal and external customers. I think you've got to have that appreciation to really move it forward.
And do you have anything that you wanted to add to that, Phil?
Yeah, so from my point of view, the way I went around influencing people was probably a little bit more Machiavellian. So everyone knows what quality is intrinsically. You know what's good and bad. So the way I kind of sold, and I'm talking specifically to my situation here, where I had to sell a quality strategy, I had to sell testing to a bunch of people that didn't want to do testing, sell to the product management team to say, can you be a little bit more precise in your requirements because it affects us downstream. So eventually, so I kind of took a two-pronged attack on it, as in find out what good means to them, so and kind of leverage that, and then pick your champions. So for me, it was there was a couple of and I purposely stayed away from QA on this because every single one of them is a proponent of quality and testing. That's fine, but the reason I did that, again, we want to move away from that ownership of QA owning quality. So like there was a few POs that were chosen. There was a few product managers. There was a few developers set up. I think I saw in comments there that we did as well. We set up a quality community of practice, and you just kind of you almost infest quality into the teams that way. You know, it's more of an infestation, and then what I also done, or what I do is if you're trying to deliver something to a team, a new process, like a non-quality team, say, hey, I need you to be more focused on quality. You pick your champions, but you go and you try and talk to the people that you know will be the loudest in that meeting. You know, they'll have an issue with it. Yeah, exactly. You know, because, and then you take them through excuse me, your presentation or your kind of what you're trying to influence them with, and then you get their feedback, and then by the time you actually try and influence, you know what, they're bought into it. So it's kind of a, you know.
I think one of the things I've found with those types of events when you do that and those conversations as well is you've really got to enter those conversations and those tactics with the thought in your mind that you could be going into this and you could be the one who's wrong. You've got to have your mind open to the fact that you might have your mind changed in this meeting. You may actually be the one that's wrong in this scenario.
That is so true. And I just want to relay back to people so that they catch the points. That, you know, I call it the gold dust that was dropping. So the points that I just want to pick up there from all that we discussed around this idea of influence is, you know, start by looking at how can you build empathy with the people that you want to influence. And in order to do that, you firstly have to choose who it is. Like, who is it that you actually want to work with? Pick your champions, as you were saying there, Phil. And there are different ways of working with people. In some cases, you can pair with them in some way, or you can pair different people in different teams together to build that empathy. Or you can have like an induction process where, as you get new people on board, you're making sure they meet new people across the organization to increase that level of understanding. But the whole idea of looking at who it is that you need to influence to get to where you want to get to becomes key. And I just want to pick up on the question that was asked about what are some other resources that people can look at. So other than we have a section about influence in the Leading Quality book, but when we spoke to the different leaders, they all mentioned a mixture of these 4 books. And I believe that these books are the ones we should be giving to everyone in our teams that we want to be better at influencing. The Psychology of Influence by Robert Cialdini is almost the foundational book on influence. I've already mentioned To Sell Is Human, super good for people in your teams who might feel like having to persuade or talk to other people isn't really their thing. whoever tells the best story wins. We've all been in those meetings where someone has explained something and we thought, what the hell are they on about? But yet they've spun it in a way and in a story that really made the change happen. And then thank you for arguing. And these are all great resources for looking at how you can influence.
Yeah,
and so
another book.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there's another book I've read that I found really helpful in my career, more as a manager than specifically around quality, but it makes the same points about collaboration and empowering people. It's called Fish. I can't remember who the author is, but I will send the details to you after I've got it on my bookcase. And it's absolutely brilliant book. It tells a tale about a fish market in Philadelphia, or about a PM who witnessed a fish market in Philadelphia, which revolutionized the way they approached the projects that they were managing and the teams that they were managing. So it's a really interesting insight into how to empower people and make people take ownership of what they're doing and work as a team to deliver collaboratively. It's a very, very useful book. It's great how it talks about giving feedback and presenting, complex challenges to people without making it sound like you're putting them on the spot or blaming them for failure,
Yep. Fahim just added what that book is. It's called Fish by Stephen London. So if you want to get that, look for that on Amazon. And we'll also be sending you all of this after, so you don't have to scramble for everything right now. The final area that I wanted us to have a quick talk about is really looking at how do you guys look at leading quality and managing the quality of your applications and your teams while working remotely. And Phil, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Okay. So this is an interesting one because I think so. We took the decision to. I think we're either working remotely now 4 weeks, or it could be 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure. So we took the decision, and everyone's initial reaction was, "Well, productivity is going to dip," and that was something that we had to get into the mindset is. We're still a working company. We have to. There's no cutting of corners, and we all know that the first thing to be cut is quality. That's time is always the opposition of quality. So what I kind of asked my team to do is send out best practices again. So the whole idea of a user story to be written properly and stuff like that. Also, to make the quality team more visible, so ensure that they're speaking up, ensure that they're on all the meetings, making sure they're dropping in, and they're making themselves more visible essentially. And then also from my own perspective is I'm very conscious of bug trends now. I was already, as everyone should be, but I'm very conscious of, right, where are we seeing the bugs? Are the requirements gaps, right? That means maybe people aren't just focused on requirements. Is a simple testing stuff? So that's kind of leading me to where I need to make any changes, if any. Although again, if there's anyone on from my company, my team are perfect. I don't need to make any changes.
Of course. And Mark, from your side?
So I've been working with the remote teams, completely remote teams since last year. So we opted to work with a third-party service for our testing. So I went through this challenge last year really, and I found, like you say, having really simple but obvious processes in place. And I think we talk about Agile a lot on DevOps and not having too much process, but I think you've got to have some basic guidance for your teams. Beyond that, it's about communication. It is all about the communication for me. As the simplest things can make this so much harder. So I don't know about you guys, but I found since working from home completely remotely for the last 5 weeks, I found that the volume of emails I dealt with initially was probably 10 times what I would normally deal with. And I already had a lot in my mailbox. And then on top of that, your day was supplemented with 5 or 6 new meetings. Because you had to have those check-ins daily to make sure you were on top of things. Yeah. And the thing I found is, one, if you're going to have those meetings, keep them short and make sure somebody's taking minutes and actions from them, because otherwise you find yourself repeating the same meeting day after day, where you talk about the same topics and nobody's taken ownership of it. Nobody's taken anything away. So make sure if you're going to do that, you've got to go a little bit back towards inspection levels of meetings where you're actually taking notes and minutes, and people are getting the tasks assigned out to them on your task board, on your Kanban wall, whatever it is. But also simple things about emails. One of the things I find in this sort of situation where you're all communicating via email and messages is messages to multiple people will often end up not being actioned. Unless you are specifically calling out a person who you want to do the work, they will not do the work because they're all going to assume that somebody else is taking care of it. One of the biggest challenges I've found in my team is if you send a message to the entire team thinks somebody else in the team is dealing with it and the work never gets done. So the simplest thing about making the key person the to in your email and CCing everybody else to make it clear that they're the target, and even in the message mention at this person, you need to do this. You need to give me an update on this. And so I think once you get into that habit, you can cut down on the number of meetings, cut down on the number of emails, and you start to see the productivity return in a slightly different way.
So I think with that, it's kind of clear that it all actually starts with communication, right? When we work with teams, we look at it from the aspect of how asynchronous can you do your communications? So can you do things outside of a meeting and have people just either put in a Slack thread or something like that? And then B, focusing on that comms again. And the takeaways that you have here is make sure there is clear best practice. Yeah. Make sure that you're doing the foundations and the foundations are being done. Set up guidelines. I've got here that you end up having so many meetings. One of the things that we did when the meeting explosion happened is we started doing ad hoc calls, because the only reason you're having most of these meetings is because you can't do like a drive-by walk with someone. And so because you can't walk next to someone, instead of setting up a meeting which somehow always has to be 30 minutes, we would just press the call button and call the person as if we were just next to them. And this can seem very dangerous because we don't like that in our company. However, the difference was if you didn't want to be interrupted, you just put yourself on Do Not Disturb and then the phone calls can't come through in Slack. And we found that to be an incredible way for us to do it. Now, I'm going to move us on only because of I do realize time and we might be going 5-10 minutes over on the timing here. But I just want us to kind of take all of those different tidbits of information across those three and just reflect on how do they actually support us from a company impact level. So the first area that we talked about was, what is your quality narrative? And there were some really cool ideas that we had around, instead of making it like your idea, how can you get other people involved? How can you set goals? Is there rebranding or reterms that you need to do in order to move that forward? Then we went and spoke about influence. And as we looked at influence, we kind of looked at, it's really focusing around building empathy and making sure that you pick the champions and the people who are going to help you make those changes and be on your side when you're trying to change that culture. And then finally, we ended with some quick ideas around how can you do some of this while working remote. And it all came down to, as always, communication and how can you communicate. And so when you look at those ideas and we look at those three, they're very much focused around the company impact side when we look at that whole impact triangle. And part of that was, how does it affect the team in terms of how do we look at making sure that we're getting the best out of our team, and that has a play. And then some of the things we talked about were, making sure that we have a good product for our end customers, but we didn't dig too much into that. And what I want to do for just a few minutes is share some of the ways that we look at this inside Global App Testing, just super quickly. So on the customer impact side, I think when it comes to quality, no one is more important than your customer. The customer should be center stage of everything, because if they don't use or like the thing that we're building, we don't really have a business. And so for us, we want to make sure that we can support our customers finding the most high impact and critical issues almost before their customers ever see them. And so the way that we end up doing that is we have a network of 40,000 QA professionals around the world that have all been vetted and ranked. And we support companies with things like exploratory testing. We can therefore do it on such a wider range of device and operating system combinations, and we can run the whole thing 24/7 for our customers. We support them with things like test case creation if they need to create test cases, and obviously executing those, which we can end up doing quite fast due to the parallel side of the number of people that we have inside our team. And when we did some quick stats the other day looking at from a like from like out of all the stuff that we do, what's critical and high, the sort of severity of the things that we're finding for our customers. And we found that 37% of the stuff that we found were in that category. So we know that we're finding things of value to people. And so then when you look at the idea of team impact, you know, some people use us because they're like, hey, can you help us find these issues that might face our customers? But other people use us because they want us to help with the team restrictions that they might have. They might not have enough resources inside their team. They might not be able to scale their headcount at this stage, or maybe they're having testing spikes that they need us to help resolve. So there are ways that we can help people from that whole staffing side of resolving that. And then lastly, you very much are already part of this here, but this whole idea of helping support our customers think through the impact they can have from a company level is a lot of the work that we do. So we help support our customers with all of this thinking around influencing and persuading the people inside their company. And, you know, if I just look at, you know, what some people are saying, when we were speaking with the Microsoft team, the VP of engineering there was just saying that, hey, they're getting such a high signal to noise improvement over time. And that's because of that communication part that you guys were talking about. We communicate and work so tightly with the companies that we work with. We pretty much are their partners, and as if we're part of their team in as much as possible. So one of the things that I just want everyone to be aware of is that we normally, when people are thinking about working with us, we normally do a trial, which can cost $5,000. And that's because we make such a huge investment from our side to help support the companies that we work with. But, you know, as we got excited about doing this webinar, having these cool speakers on, we said to ourselves, you know, we know that a lot of companies right now are facing various challenges. And we wanted to make sure that we could still help them in this environment and help them through the conversation. So if you have been thinking about, hey, we might need some extra support, we would love to have a chat with you. And to make that as frictionless as possible, instead of us doing a trial at $5,000, we're willing, just for the next 48 hours, for the people who are on this webinar, because you took the time to be with us, we're willing to do that for free. That's not a typo. It does actually say 0. And that's really also because, you know, one of our cultural values inside GAT is all about how do you, you know, master your craft. And the fact that you guys are on this call wanting to learn more about these ideas, those are the kind of people that we want to work with, because when we're working with people inside their teams, we like those kind of people. And so if you have if you kind of jump on a call with our sales team in the next 48 hours, we already have your names and know who you are. We will do a few things. If you want to get a copy of the Leading Quality book, which is what a lot of these ideas come from, we've got that for you. I talk to a lot of people and they say, I don't have the time to read stuff. I'm too busy. I've got kids screaming every now and then. I don't have the free time. So we also have an audio book. So if you want that, you speak to the guys, they'll give that to you. And there's also some worksheets that we have that might also be useful. And then if you ended up working with us past that, we also have a few other stuff that we're putting together. So all those 4 books that I just talked about influence, we will give those to you at the end of a successful trial. We have test case creation. Sometimes people want to work with us, but they end up having too many, they're worried that they might not be able to do it because there's just too much effort involved. We'll get rid of that obstacle for you by just creating test cases for you. I will, for the first 3 people only who end up completing their trial, I will do a custom company presentation for them just to make sure that they are influencing the company as much as possible, and we'll give a copy of the books for all of those people. So those are the kind of value adds that we want to add to people who are on this call, but it's only for people who are on this call for the next couple of hours. When we did a trial with one of our customers, they basically were like, they couldn't believe the number of stuff that we found in such a short period of time, even though they thought we would have a limited understanding of their apps. And one thing we're quite skilled at is making sure we understand people's apps. And it's not just them, it's lots of other people that are telling us the same feedback. And so if you wanted to have a chat with our team and just be eligible for those offers, if you scan this QR code, or if you go to lqbook.co/free trial, we will make sure that you're registered, and that if you do end up working with us, you get all of those special offers. But it's only available for the next 48 hours, which means it's going to end on Thursday the 24th at 5 p.m. BST. So make sure you have a look at that, and if you're open to it, have a chat with us. And sometimes people are asking, you know, is this right for me? Is this right for my team, my company? And there are a few different, ways that I look at this. If you are increasing your release velocity right now, you need help with the spike, we can help you with that. If you're having a resources challenge, you've got too much headcount, we can help you. If you're wondering, but will these testers even understand my app? You'll be surprised about some of the stuff that we can do, and this trial will help you understand that. If you like the idea of what we do, but you're like, I don't know if you'll be able to fit in with our processes or systems, once again, this is a great way for you to be able to understand that. And if you're using another provider and you just want to understand and compare some results, we could also do something around that. So make sure you click on that link or head to there if you wanted to. So we are now going to open things up for questions. You can put some questions in the chat. I just wanted to ask if there were any questions around that offer that we had. And then I'll move on to some additional questions to the rest of Phil and Mark while we still have a bit of time. I can see some questions being typed in.
These all look like questions for you, Mark.
Great nomination from the very beginning. Okay, what do you think a thought our CEO has cancelled QA team? What do you think about cancelling the QA team and developing? We should do produce. Okay, so this is that idea of what do you think when someone comes up with a thought that we should cancel the QA, just get rid of it, and developers should create better quality code.
I think, if I may take this, Phil.
Oh, please do, sir.
So I think there are proven cases where this works, but you don't get rid of the testing team. I think this is the mistake that people make when they talk about this. You can reduce the amount of actual testing in a cycle, as in phase testing, that you do by shifting your quality back into the development phase and shifting it back earlier in the process. But you don't do that by removing the testers. You do that by augmenting the development team with either testing skills or with testers who work alongside them. I think Atlassian do a really good job of this. They have quality engineers, and they don't actually have a test team. The testers are all responsible for their testing. So the developers are all responsible for building testing into their process. All the automated tests that get developed are developed by the developers themselves, but they are advised and guided by quality engineers. Mm-hmm. So, there's lots of ways to do it. I don't think you should ever consider removing quality teams, but thinking of them as testers, I think you can remove that concept. I think we're moving into a world where the automation that we're doing, machine learning and AI are opening up some magnificent opportunities for us to do this, where you look to augment or replace a lot of the manual test effort with automated test effort, and then you can better purpose those testers who are doing that work to guide the earlier parts of the process, to review requirements before they come in, to have that static analysis role, to sit with developers and just walk through what they're doing with them and point out where the quality holes are going to be. I think that's what I'd say to any CEO who said we should get rid of testing. I would ask them, if you're that confident, let us not test for a month and see how you feel after 2 releases without any testing.
That's a really good idea, actually. Let's do a split trial right now, and you'll already see the effects of the situation.
If you're going to do that, you have to make sure that the developers are aware that the quality is their responsibility. And I think this is the problem when you're doing a culture shift from an old-fashioned development cycle to modern delivery cycles. It's about making everybody in the loop aware that they are equally responsible for quality. And then once you get to that culture, you've got a chance of reducing the amount of testing phases that you have.
The only worry I always have is if you go down that route of removing quality, I totally agree with you, Mark, is it's not in the testing, it's in the quality of the testing. Yeah. You know what I mean? We trialed this on in one of our teams, and they they didn't really get on with the tester there, and they were like, we don't want a tester anymore. Like, okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Remove them. 4 months later, they wanted a tester back, not for testing, but to be that kind of, I don't know if you're ever trying to change the habit, but you're told to put a post-it. You're told to put a post there, to be the post-it, to go, guys, stop cutting corners, this is what we should be doing, It's just essentially the quality of the testing rather than the testing itself.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of companies still think that you improve testing by throwing more testing at it, and that's not the case. It's not about volume. It's about the quality of the actual tests themselves, and the testers themselves having quality processes to measure what they do.
Yeah,
you can't write a lot of automation without having tests in place to validate your automation. You know, who watches the Watchmen?
One thing to add there, and I know this, having spoken to many different companies, is that there is a perception, or should I call it a marketing, that your team can work without any look at any view of quality. But when you actually go deeper into those companies, you'll be surprised about how much quality work is happening, or that the marketing is only for one particular team in a team of 20, where the other 19 have like the biggest quality teams you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's the perception that CEO, because you're referring to a CEO there, that might have around it. I'm just going to bounce through two more questions with the 5 minutes we've got left. There's one here from Cam that says, I'm not sure if now is the right time for us to do this, but would still like to get that offer. Is there a way of me getting it later? And I think you're referring to the offer that we put here. So yes, if you just have a conversation with our team in the next 48 hours, then I think the offer stands. But after that, we've never really done this before, so we are literally cutting it at that time. So as long as you get in that time, everything should be good. There is, scrolling up a little bit, there's a question here. How do you foresee your teams and the work that they do adapting and changing with the introduction of all the new tools, i.e. some of these AI-based automation tools?
I'll put a start again, Phil. If it's okay.
Yeah, you work away, man. You work away. I'll let you.
So I got asked earlier this year, for probably about the 50th time I've been asked it. Do I see automation replacing, being able to replace all testing? And I think for the first time this year, after doing some studying with AI and machine learning, I actually have slightly changed my opinion on this. The argument always used to be that you couldn't replace all testing with machines because machines can't make rational decisions. They make programmatic decisions, and they can't look at a return event and then rationalize what's happened in that return event and change their approach based on those circumstances. But the thing is, the way we do that as humans is we draw on our empirical knowledge. It's quite simple. We draw on our experience and we formulate a response to that situation based on things we've experienced in the past, and that changes our route from that point forward. The thing that machine learning does is exactly that. So it looks at all the work you've done over the last 10 years, however much data you've got, and when it comes across one of these junctions where it has a failure, it looks at that failure and then it goes back through all of that empirical knowledge a lot more efficiently and a lot more consistently than a human can do it, and it will then choose a new route. It's how AI is coming into customer support and stuff like that. So I think where we are now, we can't do it. Give it a few years, and I think machine learning could replace pretty much all manual testing. But again, I don't think that means testers are out of a job. I think it means testers in their current role will need to adapt and change. Manual testers will go to doing review with BAs, and I think we're going to see a massive change in our market as a result of ML and AI. But it's going to take a long time to come in. I mean, a lot of companies still aren't doing it agile. A lot of companies still aren't using modern delivery tools. So it won't be an overnight sensation, but I think you're looking at companies like Google and Amazon and your big players with AI and with ML really changing the landscape of testing, of how they do it and how they utilize the people within it.
That's Mark's final words, because we're coming up to the time. Phil, any final words and thoughts on this from you?
If I said anything else, it would be just gibberish compared to Mark there. So I let him finish it up.
Okay, cool. With that, I just want to say a huge thank you, firstly, to everyone who spent their day-to-day coming to listen to us talk. It is super lovely to have the community here, kind of having these conversations in the Quality Leaders Network. I want to say thank you to you, Mark, and thank you to you, Philip, for just being here, talking through your ideas, sharing your knowledge and your experience with the rest of us in our community. If you want to get hold of anyone, the contact details are here. We will also, share some of their details after this, the ones that they allow, the LinkedIns and those ones. And other than that, I hope everyone stays safe, and please enjoy the rest of your week, and we shall speak to you all at the next webinar. Thank you for attending.
Thanks, guys.